I'm in this space of learning to see it for what it is. I mean, and that's been the last 2 years of my life in therapy, of like learning to be able to actually see this as abuse and to see all of these situations as, hi, Marta was 12. Let's wrap our brains around that and what does 12 look like?
All right. Hello, and welcome back to You Need a Counselor podcast. My name is Dr. Julie Johnson. I'm the president and founder here at Heart and Solutions. We are still doing outpatient mental health therapy over telehealth on the computer, by phone, or on the computer by video, anywhere in the state of Iowa. So no matter where you live, you can do therapy by phone. We are also in 6 locations in Iowa and in some schools as well for therapy.
And I'm Chrissa Hunt. I am the Vice President at Heart and Solutions in charge of the BHIS department. So BHIS stands for Behavioral Health Intervention Services, and that is our program where we go in home and work with children ages 4 through 18 on different behavioral skills. We can also see them in school or in the office or telehealth like Julie was talking about as well. And this is our podcast, You Need a Counselor. So we are designed for people curious about counseling but have barriers keeping them from experiencing the benefits of counseling. Our mission is to share stories about counseling, good, bad, and indifferent, and spread the message that everyone can benefit from mental health and behavioral health counseling services.
So we post on Sunday nights at 5 p.m. Central Time. So go ahead and make an appointment with yourself. You can make a little date with yourself and your earbuds or your headphones, however you listen to stuff. I'm really old school. I've got a cord on my headphones. But yeah, make a date with yourself because you are worth it. And that time is valuable. So in the meantime, you can also, while you're listening, you can batch up your laundry to put away, your meal prepping. You can wash your car, do whatever it is that you are garden, do some kind of task to be able to absorb that information while your body is busy doing something that maybe you don't want to do. That gives you the entire week to get set up with your counselor. All right. So today we've got our first ever returning guest. We've got Marta Payne here with us today. Hey, Marta.
Hello. It's good to be back.
Hello, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. We will link Marta will link her previous episode for you guys in the show notes so that you can hear that episode as well. But when we were doing that interview, we got to the end of the episode and we thought, oh my gosh, we have so much more to talk about. And we just couldn't squeeze it all into one episode. So we're back again with Marta. So I will remind you guys, Marta is the editor of the You Need a Counselor podcast. So she is the only person other than Chrissa and I to have probably watched or listened to every single episode. Yes. She also watches them in painstaking detail while taking notes.
Makes us look good.
Makes us look good. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so in that work, I always just think it's such a beautiful marriage, this editing work that you do here, because, one of your titles, Marta, is digital storyteller, right? Visual storyteller, digital storyteller. And oh my goodness, we've had a lot of stories shared on this podcast. And I think that the editing makes such a big difference when it comes to storytelling, especially. I remember an interview with, Jeff Bridges. You guys know Jeff Bridges. He's an actor, and he was in this movie with Ryan Reynolds called R.I.P.D. And it was kind of like a Men in Black kind of thing, right? But it was a horrible, horrible movie. And he said in an interview afterwards, he said, it was a really, really terrible movie. And we were surprised because when we were shooting it, it was a great movie. These were great scenes. But it all came down to the editing and what was cut out of the movie and how the timing was. And so that always kind of sticks with me in terms of how important editing really, really is to storytelling. And so welcome, Marta. Thank you for being here.
Yes, of course. So and it's funny because like even like as you guys were doing your intros, like in my head, I was like doing the shortcuts to like how I would edit those like intros of like, okay, cut that, enlarge you, make you go here, put in the lower thirds, all of those things. And I was like, no, I'm in the present with you guys. I'm not exactly. I'm right here. I'm not actually editing this right now. That'll come later. But yeah, so it's editing's fun. I enjoy it.
That's funny.
So, Marta, what was it like editing your previous interview?
I don't really remember. I really probably should have gone back and at least read the show notes from that episode because I know I talked a little bit about like my counseling experience and stuff, but I don't really remember what I talked about. I mean, and in general, it was fine. I think to edit, there was a lot of I know the snippet was just me over and over again saying, "Oh, gonna edit that out. Gonna change this. Nope, gonna edit this," and like as I was in the interview. So a lot of that came out and came through in the editing of like, oh man, I was very aware. But yeah, no, it wasn't too horrible editing that. We'll see how this one goes, but it's you never know.
I loved that intro though, because you bring such a unique perspective to all of the interviewees that we've had, all of the stories that have been shared, all of the lifetimes of information that have been shared by our guests, and so I love that intro that you did of, oh, gonna edit that. I just thought it was so great, because it really must be such a different perspective when you're watching something that you're going to edit versus experiencing something in real time, the way that we are now as we're recording this. And as I was kind of thinking about that editing process, in some ways, it is somewhat similar to what it's like sitting in the counselor's chair or the therapist's chair, because as Chrissa knows and can probably talk more about, when we're in session as a counselor, as a therapist, we've kind of got a similar dual brain processing happening. We've got what we're doing. We're in a conversation, we're talking to a person, we're looking at a person, but our minds are going, oh, I've got to put that in the note. And, oh, I'm going to try this intervention next. Let's see how that goes. Right. And, or like, oh, what was that person's aunt's name? I forget, but it was something weird. Right. So in the counseling chair too, I think there's sometimes that similar dual processing happening at the same time, and you've got your counselor brain, and then you've got your counselor brain for later kind of taking notes, and similar situation, I would think, with editing when you're experiencing something you're going to edit later.
Oh, I am completely sure. Yes. No, I mean, and even like having written like my bio this morning for today, or thinking about stuff that is like, oh, I could share this or I could share this. I'm like, but wait, what do I want to put into the world? And how does this form into a story? And how do I morph this into what I want it to be as an output? Do I want anything to be as an output? And, just like very aware of all of the words that are coming out of my mouth. And I'm sure everybody is that's on the podcast, but in a way that it's like, oh, I have to edit this. What am I going to, all of the above. So I'm sure it's similar in a lot of ways to what you're talking about there.
My daughter in kindergarten, one of the first things they did, and they did it throughout the year, was Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And the first habit, right, is begin with the end in mind. And I always I kind of think about that when I think about, your processing of the show and then editing later, is even when you're writing your bio, even when you're preparing to come appear on the show, you're beginning with the end in mind. You've got that end product. And I think similarly in counseling, a lot of times people don't go to counseling because they can't maybe picture that end product, or maybe they can picture the end product, but they can't picture the middle stuff. the stuff in between. And that stuff in between can be so overwhelming sometimes that it kind of blurs that end result picture, right? Am I allowed to wish for that result, right? Because what happens if I don't get it? And so very, very similar here, where you're able to go, yeah, I can begin with that end product in mind. But knowing that there are all these pieces in the middle, and like, I don't know what Julie's going to start talking about. Like, why is she talking about the 7 habits of highly successful people? Right? I mean, we just don't know what that middle ground is going to look like. But I think in a way, we're all editing our lives. We're looking at what we want it to look like. We're kind of working backwards sometimes from those goals. But do you think that your work in editing, do you think that impacts the way that you live your life or the way that you set goals in any way? I mean, editing is all about removing stuff or removing the things that we don't want. Did you find that when you started to do more video editing and doing it on such a regular basis, has that had any impact on you in your life?
I don't necessarily know about editing in general, definitely like within storytelling and within seeking stories, just in how I interact with people. I mean, my background is in journalism, so it's very much, how do you ask questions? What questions do you ask? Always wanting to know more and learning to be curious, and like having those things that pop up more questions like, oh, that somebody else might have just missed that, but that's interesting to me. Like, I want to know more about that. Tell me about this. And really being able to draw things out of people, which very much is what counselors do all of the time and all of that you do. But within the sense of storytelling, of being, it changes how I interact with people just on daily conversations. Of, I'm not always looking for a story, but in the background, my brain is always looking for the story, looking for that connection with other people and other narratives. So I would think in that aspect, I think storytelling and editing very much does have an effect on how I go about my daily life and daily business with other people. Yeah. I mean, just as a person in terms of editing, I've always been very conscious and aware with what I put into the world, and like how other people perceive me and how I interact with everything. So I wouldn't say necessarily that starting editing made me that way. Life made me that way. But so yeah, I guess that kind of answers what you asked there.
Yeah, it's kind of like a chicken and an egg, right? Am I great at editing for story because I kind of always am looking for that story because of my journalism background, or does the editing impact life, right? It's kind of a cyclical process sometimes, it sounds like. So what is it that makes a good story? I mean, you've got a background in journalism. You're always looking for the story. What is it that makes a good story?
I mean, I could go into like all the things of like, this is what makes something newsworthy, or, this is what makes a good story. But I mean, for me, I think it's just that personal narrative is what I also often look for, is just that more of an intimate, this is life, or this is my experience, and not something that's just very at an arm's distance. I want the like nitty gritty and in there, and like, and it doesn't have to be a pretty ending. Like it can be a work in progress or something like that. So that's for me, what makes a good story is just that like true authenticity and true just not necessarily. Yeah, I mean, true vulnerability, and just that, and something that makes the story life, makes it true, makes it so people can connect and relate within a story, I think.
Yeah, no, I love that, because there are all of these technical pieces of storytelling. Or Dr. Grote was here last week, and she talked about some of the reasons that in counseling we use the term a narrative, because even though we say the term telling our story, sometimes a story can feel like it's made up, right? And so telling our narrative is that piece of like, this is who I am, this is what I've experienced, this is what happened, and it brings a different kind, I think, of truth. I think it brings the kind of truth that you're talking about, which is authenticity, and like, this is real life, and this is my experience, and this is what it felt like. And that is a different kind of truth, I think, than like, well, did you really go to the park? Did you really, right? Whatever it is, you can tell a story in a very technical way, and you can say, hey, a story is good because all of these technical pieces. But I think what you're hitting on more is that, no, a story is good because people can relate with it. People can sense themselves in the other person in some way. And I think that's really powerful. I think that painful experiences often can really do that, because it's such a universal, some of those feelings are so universal, that we can really feel ourselves in another person's story. And tell me about, I know last session, or not last session. Wow. Okay. Who's a counselor? Everybody needs a counselor. So last interview, we talked about some of your experiences. We talked about you had a mediocre counseling experience at a time that you were just not ready to see a counselor. Not ready, was not the right time. And then you've had a great counseling experience here recently, where you've been able to develop that relationship and develop that trust and rapport. And so as you were sharing more information, you had kind of talked about this program, or of To Write Love on Her Arms. And so tell us a little bit about that. What is this?
Yeah, I mean, To Write Love on Her Arms is a mental health organization. I forget how old they are. They're super great. They were founded with originally to help a friend who was struggling with self-harm, essentially, but they've since morphed into a lot of things. There are a lot of suicide prevention, there are a lot of self-harm, a lot of everything, all-encompassing mental health. And they were very much my first introduction to the mental health world, and very much in the first, maybe, I don't know. They were just this first introduction, really, of there's people out there that, struggle with things. What? I'm not the only one what is this? That's crazy. And I was first introduced to them because a friend of mine had given me one of their bracelets. They're big on merch and big on concerts. And that's very much who To Write Love is. And that she had given me a bracelet because she had found out that I had been self-harming in high school and was just wanted to do something, anything that she could, kind of thing, and just be a good friend. And she had introduced me to them and what they do. And they put out a lot of really great resources. They have a fabulous Find Help tool where you can very much search in your area and all these different variables. And they just do a lot of really, really good work around the globe, really. So To Write Love is cool. I like them a lot. But
wonderful. Yeah, I mean, I love that focus on, helping somebody else who might be struggling, because sometimes when we're struggling with something like self-harm, it's much more difficult for us to go ahead and seek out supports. Mm-hmm. And so if we're constantly doing it for the people in our lives and they're doing it for us, it can be a lot easier for us to be able to accept that help and seek that help. So your friend, so this was the friend that had been a really strong support to you in high school, and you had shared this information with her, and she had kept it secret, right? Or kept it private.
Ish. Enough. I mean, that's very much what led to, I forget if I even shared about this on the first one, but for a little bit in high school, I was being kind of forced to see the counselor in school. And my friend had told a teacher who told the counselor, because I mean, when you're concerned about somebody, you tell people, and I get it. It makes sense now. I see it. But very much lied my face off in that space and was like, nope, I'm fine. She's like, cool. It's probably just a phase. You're fine. And because I mean, I knew if I was honest in that space, that greater steps were going to have to be taken. And like, it couldn't just stop at like, oh, okay, you're struggling with this thing. You know, it would have been, okay, no, we're gonna do all of these other things now. And I didn't want that in my life at all. So very much lied my way out of that situation. So yes, my friend kept it secret, and ish. Yes. But
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of in an appropriate way, right? So told other people, but told people that could help with the situation, as opposed to telling other people who maybe couldn't offer help in that situation.
Exactly.
Yeah. So how did your friend find out that you were struggling with self-harm? Did you tell your friend, or did she find out some other way?
I don't really remember. I think she had seen something on my hand or something. I don't know. I forget how that happened. Yeah, I wish I remembered, but I don't know. I don't know how she found out. I forget.
There's so many ways, that people can find out, that their friend might be struggling with self-harm, or even the urge to self-harm. Sometimes that just fighting that urge is so exhausting, even if there aren't any physical signs. Just fighting that urge to do it can be so exhausting and can take such a toll on somebody. And even those signs can be sometimes identified. And then sometimes our friends, they go, okay, well, I suspect something, but what do I do now? What do I do with that information? And like you said, telling somebody who can offer support. I think that in your friend's case, that might, for your friend, that situation might have felt not like a win, right, for her in that situation, because it's like, oh, I tried to help my friend, right, but it wasn't the right time for her. Right now I feel bad because now she's got to go through all this other stuff, right? But I love what you're saying about now when you look back at it, right, and you think about, gosh, if I'm not sure how old you were, but if a 15-year-old or 16-year-old child really said that to me now, I would tell somebody. I would get them into counseling. I would get them into these things, and being able to see that that for that friend, though, that's going to be a painful experience. Deciding what to do, and if you do nothing, that can be a very painful experience, and if you do something, a very painful experience. Yeah, absolutely. And so when did you start to have those feelings or those urges? How old were you, would you say?
I mean, it was early my freshman year of high school, so 13, 14 was when it all first kind of started. The self-harm didn't necessarily start out of ways that you would typically see it starting, I think, within kids, of like, oh, I see this example by my peers. I see this on movies. Like, this was back in like 2010. So like there wasn't a lot of that in the media that I saw anyway. I mean, I was out in the middle of nowhere listening to country music, on a farm. Like that was my life experience. But the self-harm very much was born out of, prior to all of this, had been involved in like, just the internet's a really bad place, especially for a child in the early mid 2000s, of when we didn't know what the dangers were in any of that. So very much early on, like 11-ish, had found myself in these spaces of online chat rooms and being groomed, and that led to a lot of exploitation and abuse throughout my life, and still is very much stuff that is still around and I have to deal with. But one of these people he had struggled with self-harm when he was a child, and he was a grown adult and I was a child, and all of these things were happening, and he was mad one night, and it was self-harm was very much born out of retaliation against him, of like, well, let me show you how much you've hurt me. Like, maybe this will make you actually care about me. The things that go through a little 13, 14-year-old kid's head of like, this is how they're going to care about me. This is how they're going to actually love me. This is whatever spiral. So it was very much in retaliation. And then it led to very much as a coping skill to everything that was going on, and a coping skill to avoid every single emotion ever in life. And it was an all-encompassing thing in my life. And it's still something that I deal with literally every day. And it is so frustrating. But I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with all of this. So, but yeah, that's how it started. That's where it all came from.
So, yeah, I mean, internet abuse of children is absolutely is a huge issue. And especially back then when, I mean, you're younger than I am, but, back when we were that age, the internet was so new. And it was, our parents didn't know I mean, I guess some of them did, but the internet was brand new. I mean, nobody had the experience to know what was going on, or what these sites were, or what these chat rooms were, and who was on there. We just didn't have that information because it was a brand new thing. And so it's such a huge issue, and it is such a huge issue today. And so these were chat rooms where there were adult men who were looking for younger women, or not women, younger children in the chat rooms.
Yeah, very much so. Very much just, I mean, and it started fairly innocently. I mean, as most grooming situations do, it's somebody showing interest. It's making you feel seen and known and liked and desired. And then it goes from there, and then you're stuck. And then there's fear, and then there's blackmail, and then there's all of these various elements. And I don't know. I'm in this space of learning to see it for what it is. I mean, and that's been the last 2 years of my life in therapy, of like learning to be able to actually see this as abuse, and to see all of these situations as, hi, Marta was 12. Let's wrap our brains around that, and what does 12 look like, and what in all of those kind of things. So yeah, it's been a lot. That's for sure. I mean, and yeah, it was very much this space of chat rooms full of grown men and women seeing opportunity in children. And it just grew from there. I mean, at one point, I know when I went through and like deleted a bunch of accounts, whether it was like MSN chat or different Skype accounts or different Kik accounts, and like all of these things, there were hundreds of people that I had been in contact with that had at one point used me, or multiple points used me. And just like, I'm learning to allow that to be an actual frustration because a lot of times I just very much like, yep, whatever. I was fine. I was a stupid kid. Like, who cares? It's in the past. But like learning to actually allow frustration in my own life is where I'm at now. But that has then also led to this space recently of just recognizing the impact that I had in other young girls' lives too, because there was points, as is with a lot of like trafficking and exploitation and stuff like that, where I was a recruiter and I trained and I taught these other children how to be used by these adults. And like, so I'm in this space recently of like learning how to hold these things and to not sit in the shame and guilt, but also allow that remorse that I have so deeply for these other children that I played a part in, their abuse and where they're at today. And I don't know where they're at today. I know where I am today, and I know the work that I'm putting in, and I don't know. So it's, yeah, a lot of the internet's wild, and people are wild and horrible sometimes. But yeah.
Wow. And so this was all happening online.
Well, yes, mostly all online. I'm honestly very, very surprised that it never like at that stage turned in person, because there were multiple people that had my address, that had my phone number, that had all of these pieces about me. And honestly, if I hadn't lived an hour into the middle of nowhere away from the interstate, like who knows, you know, if I had lived anywhere near to a metropolitan area, like the closest metros were Denver and Kansas City, and both of them are 6.5 hours away from me. So like I was very much in the middle of nowhere kind of thing. As a kid, all of it was very much all online. And then as I was in college, things like they did like always coming out of the woodwork, and it's so frustrating and so annoying because I still get random text messages or random unknown numbers or random unknown emails and like all these things from these people that just show up. And in college, it did, like one of them did show up to my house and was there, and like it's all of this stuff. So like, I mean, that's lovely. That's not, and then I do all of this to try and compensate and not have emotions about it. But so yeah, mostly all online, but other stuff too. So yeah.
Oh, and you mentioned that at that point, you started to shut down all emotions and kind of take on this, everything's okay. And take on this, because I mean, you have a very, very cheerful presentation. You have a very cheerful, and you're dependable, and you're just a wonderful person and to interact with. And so it sounds like then those emotions got so overwhelming that you said, I can't experience any of these anymore. And somewhere made kind of a choice to say, this is too painful. And then now you're going back and going, wait a minute, I'm allowed to feel those feelings. I'm allowed to feel anger about being victimized and surviving this. I'm allowed to feel all of these feelings that I didn't let myself feel before. What's that felt like, letting yourself experience those feelings as an adult?
Whether or not I'm actually there yet, I don't know. It's definitely stretching and trying and really, really difficult. And there's, and oftentimes it's, I don't know. So, even just what sitting in my therapist's office last week looked like was like, I struggle a lot with dissociation, and like, we've been working through that a lot recently of like, okay, no, can we ask your body to stay here for a second? And like, she'll catch me in these like spaces where I get stuck somewhere or whatever else, and just bringing me back to the present and like, okay, let's focus on the breathing. And like in those moments, like allowing emotion, and like we'll like have emotion for like 25 seconds and then I'm gone, and then I'm like out of there, and then it's like, okay, no, I'm gonna pull you back now, and we're gonna have this emotion again. And so it's not something that I can do on my own. I can do it on my own, but it's really, I'm not there yet at all of allowing emotions and allowing myself to have emotions, because it just feels so wrong and so incorrect. Because not only was like shutting emotions down just a protective measure, but like in these, I always want to call them relationships, and they're not relationships, they're abusive situations. But in these situations, that was wrong, and that was punishable, and that was like, to show any form of emotion, to have any like personal thing, or to like have anything about me or whatever else, was wrong and was going to be punished. And that, there were so many of these people had literal contracts that I signed about like how I would interact with them and how I would put myself into the world for them, and like that kind of thing. And like that sort of stuff was in there. Like, I will not have XYZ emotions. I will, stuff like that. So it's very, so ingrained in there of like, and then once I allow myself to start experiencing emotions, or even consider allowing myself to experience emotions, all of that fear comes back up, of this 13-year-old that was just like, yeah, okay, cool, I'll sign this contract. Yes, I'll do this, of course. And so it's it's difficult. And I mean, there have definitely been times when I've been able to like have emotion and experience emotion and like process it, but it's not a continual thing at all, not yet. But hopefully one day, maybe we'll see. But yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it's such a process, counseling, right? And it's such a process, learning who we are and learning what happened to us as children. Even in the best situations, right? Best case scenarios, like we're children, we understand things as children do. And then when we're older, we understand things a little bit differently. And when we're older than that, we understand things a little bit differently. But you're putting in the work every week to be able to do that, and to be able to process that, and to be able to continue to move forward at that, which I think is just such an amazing and inspirational work that you're doing every week, and a very difficult work, but a very important work. And it makes me so proud that you're our editor, because you're walking the walk, and you're talking the talk of it, and you're walking the walk of it, and you're doing these difficult things. And so I'm extremely proud of you for seeking counseling and sticking in it these last 2 years. And it's amazing. And you're wonderful. You are so inspirational.
Oh gosh, thanks. Oh, I don't know. Yep. Thanks.
So these, at that age, 12, 13, you use the word relationships, and these felt like relationships. Did that feel like this is just kind of how it is dating or interacting with adults?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, and for a very long time, I've just considered them relationships, and very much like, even as an adult, like knowing that they were just inappropriate relationships where I was a stupid kid, or like things that I just like, I should have known better. What, I mean, 12. We're 12. It's okay, that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, in it, I very much saw them as relationships, and very much was, I mean, there was an excitement about it, and there was a draw to it. It was something that was unknown and it was different. It was exciting. I mean, even just the aspect of getting to talk to people from around the globe. So cool. Like, I'm a small town Kansas kid that had 200 people in her town, and that's not even the town, So a lot of those things of just, there was a big excitement and a big draw to it. It felt like, I mean, it was a mature thing that I was doing and whatever, and that's something in and of itself that I've had to like kind of come to as well, of like, for a long time in college, like it was like, no, I don't know how to be in a relationship. Like, that's not for me. Like, that's not allowed. Like, all I know is this, like, I'm not meant for a healthy functioning relationship. No. And that's still terrifying. Like, the thought of like having that and being in that is still one of those things. It's like, I don't know if I'm allowed to do that. I don't know if I'm capable. We'll see. But it's one of those things that's like, I've seen kind of the line move a little bit on, of like, no, I think I can do this. I think it's okay. Like, I'm not going to get in trouble. This is fine. Right. So yeah, relationships are weird, but
yeah.
Even the language you use, to describe what you were experiencing at that time, and then the language you use now as you look back on it, right? So I just think it's so it's that truth. It's that more truth, right? That it felt like a relationship. It felt like there, you described those grooming behaviors, and where it was like, hey, this is an older person who's like interested in me as a human, right? And who, asks me questions about my day and cares about me and says these things to me that are affirming. And all of those those things are they're, of course, right? Of course that feels good. Of course that's drawing or exciting. And so, we can definitely see where not only children, but adults also are victimized by this kind of behavior, in online and in person, but I think especially online, because there is some more imminent anonymity to that. But it also feels safer online. Sometimes it can feel like, well, I'm not in a room with this person, right? This person isn't right next to me. And there can be kind of that sense of safety, but in your story, and what you're sharing, that harm, right, that those adults caused, right, is real. And it's just as real as if that adult was in the same room as a child. And I think that sometimes even offenders don't understand that. They don't understand that they might be a person who says, "Oh, I would never abuse a child. I would never harm a child." And they don't always necessarily know that they are, or they kind of rationalize, right? That it's not like I'm in person with that child. I'm not hurting that child. Um, but the harm, the pain, that even that online interaction causes is real. And I don't know that people always understand that. I think there's a little bit more wiggle room for people to kind of rationalize to themselves that they're not causing harm when they are.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and even just on the other side of it too, of like, for years it was like, it wasn't that bad, like it was just the internet, like I'm fine. They were never at my house, I was never physically trafficked, but like it still it still does cause harm, and that's still there. And like actually recognizing that for my own self, of like, no, this is because of this or whatever else, or I'm reacting like this because of this tie to this, or what, whatever the like loophole and all of that is. But yeah, no, I mean, because it's so easy for me to like push it to the side and like have those excuses of like, it was online, what's it matter, like get over yourself. And I am constantly like having to fight that own narrative in my own head.
That human tendency that we have to minimize the things that cause us pain or that caused us pain, I think that is very innately human, where we it is a coping mechanism, but I think it's also has a lot to do with, when we go through those kinds of traumas, when we go through those kinds of experiences, especially at such a young age, can really shape the way that we think about ourselves and our self-worth and what we deserve in life and how we should be treated. And it does have such an impact. But I think that is such a human cycle to kind of find ourselves in. I think in varying degrees, there's not a human being alive who hasn't experienced trauma of some sort. And when we do experience trauma, there are these natural things that our minds do and our bodies do to try to protect us, but sometimes they work too well, and they they cause us more harm. But I love what you're identifying now, which is this: there has been harm caused to me, and there has been harm caused to me by these adults that were adults at the time, and that were the ones causing harm and were the ones responsible for the situation. And that's huge, because not everybody gets to that point with our trauma, especially when we've had trauma at a young age. We don't always get to the point of being able to recognize that nope, this is something that happened to me. This is not something that I caused. This is not something that I deserved. This is not something that I should have known better or should have fought against or should have anything. This is something that is the responsibility and however we think of it, right? The karmic responsibility of the people who did it and who were adults at the time. And that's huge. And not everybody gets there. And so I'm so proud of you when you say things like that, because I know how hard that is to even say something like that.
I don't, it's one of those things that I am learning to talk about a little bit more. I mean, I don't go and just share it everywhere. And just even like recent in like the last few minutes, I've been like, oh no, what am I putting into this world? What is gonna, but like as somebody that seeks stories and has often like put themselves in spaces to connect with other people's stories, like this isn't an area that I hear talked about often. Like there's the trafficking conversations and I've listened and been a part of those, but I don't feel like I quite fit to that space. And then there's, you know, other like childhood abuse and like other conversations, but I very, very rarely hear this lane of things. And I think it's so important because I absolutely know that I am not the only kid that was out there in early mid 2000s on web chats, on all of these places, talking to people that I shouldn't have been talking to, or rather that shouldn't have been talking to me. And, you know, all of these things. So, I mean, there's parts in me that's like, I do want to tell these pieces of my story. And I do want to like have those conversations because I want that connection, and I'm sure other people want that connection too. But yeah, no. So even just right now, though, I'm just like, my parents know nothing. What if they find this podcast? Oh no, oh no, it's gonna be fine. It's gonna be fine. No, it'll be good. It'll be all right. After we signed off the last podcast, I think I had said something about like, man, I didn't actually say anything about my life. Like I didn't share anything. So coming into this one today, I was like, okay, no, like I desperately want to hear these stories that are like my own. So like, I can't, you know, not that I'm like forcing myself to say these things because I want to share my own story and I want to share these pieces. But that was also a driving thing of like, okay, no, like it's important to share my story. And I recognize that sharing my parts of my story is important. And I don't want to go around and just like trauma dump on people or whatever else. But I think it is important to have stories like this, share these experiences, because how else do you know? How else do you build safety for kids? How else do you do whatever? So I don't know. We'll see how much of all of everything makes it in the podcast. Most of it will, I promise.
I'm not gonna just, like, scrap it.
Exactly. Hi guys. And that'll be the podcast. It'll be great. It'll be so good. Right? See.
Absolutely. Like you said, we don't get to hear these kinds of stories enough. We don't get to hear, when we think about human trafficking, we think about in person, right? And we think about people being kidnapped and taken out of parking lots and traveled. And we don't always think about online predators and on these online situations, and how easy it is to be caught up in them and even to become part of that system, because I think you mentioned blackmail, and and contracting, right? And there are all of these pieces that keep people in a system or in a process that maybe they don't want to be in, but that keeps it kind of perpetuating and keeps it going forward, and people don't know. And it's so easy. And I would imagine this kind of situation impacting so many people, but not being talked about as often as it needs to be, can be so isolating. So I'm so glad that you are sharing your story here. And the piece about recruiting, right, and being part of bringing other people or other children into this system, right, it reminds me of an interview we did with Andrea, where she was talking about conversion therapy, and this process that she was a part of as a child growing up, and didn't understand, didn't understand the impact, and how easy it is to get brought into those things, and how easy it is to find ourselves stuck in that. And you and Andrea, being able to come out the other side, right, and be able to process through what happened to you, and to be able to not see yourselves as the perpetrators. It can be a difficult thing as well, right? If I saw myself as a perpetrator, and that's what kept me a victim, was because I saw myself as a perpetrator, then being able to go, nope, I was not. I was not a perpetrator. I was a victim of this situation and of this system. Is amazing to me that you guys are doing that, and that you guys continue to go to counseling, continue to do this really, really difficult work, and to share your stories with other people who have gone through the same situation. So what would you, if there are any young adults or younger people listening, that either are in a similar situation or who might find themselves in a similar situation, what might you say to those young people?
I don't know. I don't know, because it's, you can say over and over again, it wasn't your fault or whatever else, but like it's taken me years to like even come to that, like to allow myself to consider that it wasn't my fault or that I wasn't the one at fault. Like even now there are days where my therapist has to stop me and is like, no, you were a child. Like let's bring this into perspective here. Like who was this 12-year-old? Who was this 11-year-old that was on these spaces? So I don't know. I mean, just knowing that it is such a process to work through every stinking little piece of it all. That's not very inspirational at all. But it is worth it. And like some of the freedom that I like just barely tasted or like can just kind of see on the other side is so worth it and so worthwhile to put in the work and the stinking thousands of dollars that I've spent on therapy. Like it's worth it. And I don't know. And just beyond that it's worth it, that it's possible too, you're not where you'll always be. Like where you are is not the end point and doesn't have to be the end point. It is possible to relearn some of these things that were taught to you as a child. And it's hard work. It's hard work, but it's possible. I guess is what I would say.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, we a lot of times we'll do interviews on this show, and we'll talk to people who feel like, I'm on the other side of the arc, right? Or I'm on the other side of healing. And we don't always, a lot of times we'll talk to people and we'll hear stories about the struggle in the middle, right? But not when people are in the struggle in the middle. And I think that's such an important perspective to be bringing here, because, we often talk about, hey, did you have a good counseling experience? Did you have a bad counseling experience? Right. What was, and in terms of story and narrative, right? I think as humans, our brains like that tidy, like, and then everything was great, right? And they like that, like counseling works. And I think our brains really like that and try to seek that out. But I think what is so much more real is that counseling is hard and healing is hard. And it sucks and it's painful. And sometimes it feels like more painful to be working towards healing from stuff than it does to just like leave it alone and pretend it isn't a thing. And so taking each next step, showing up to each next appointment or scheduling each next appointment is such a difficult process and a painful process. And I don't know that gets talked about enough, even on this show either, is that like, yeah, everybody, you need a counselor, everybody needs a counselor, right? But it's hard and it sucks. Like it really, really does a lot of the time. And you'll leave therapy sessions feeling worse than when you went in, right? I mean, it happens that way. And so I disagree, because I do find that really inspirational. Because, what's inspirational about going through something easy? Nothing, right? But what's inspirational about going through something hard, including healing is hard. And it is absolutely inspirational to talk about the challenges of that, because they're absolutely real. Well, thank you so much, Marta, for being here and for sharing your story.
I'm Marta Payne, and I need a counselor.
Absolutely. Me too. So does Chrissa. We all do. Yeah, we all need it, but gosh, wouldn't it be nice if we didn't? If we didn't have to go to those sessions and we didn't have to, right? But man, like you said, it is worth it. And sometimes even as we're moving towards healing, that process in itself can be so rewarding, even though it's very difficult. Wonderful. Thank you so much for being on the show. Tell us where people can find you for photography and editing and all of that.
Yeah, of course. So my website is just martapayne.com. Super easy, super simple to find me. And I have all my contacts through there. You can also email me at connect@martapayne.com. And then my socials, they should all be at mmpayne96 is where you can find me. I'm currently based in St. Louis, but travel all around the Midwest and really wherever you need me. So whatever. Also do remote stuff like this, but yep, that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Highly, highly recommend Marta's work. If you're a fan of this show, you've gotten to experience that editing work. And if you know Chrissa or I, especially me in real life, you definitely understand the amount of work that Marta does
to edit us.
And how important that work is and how good that work is, if you can watch the whole show all the way through because of the editing. So wonderful to have you with us, Marta. Thank you so much again. If you are in Iowa and you are looking for outpatient mental health counseling, or if you're looking for behavioral health counseling for your kiddos in your life, go ahead and give us a call at 800-531-4236 for Heart and Solutions.
And like Julie mentioned at the beginning of the episode, we post new episodes every Sunday at 5 p.m. Central. So set a date with yourself, listen to our new episode while you meal prep or do your laundry or garden or whatever else you want to do with yourself, and listen to us, and we can help convince you to call a counselor and get set up with counseling that week. And if you have any questions for us, you can reach out to us on Facebook at You Need a Counselor Podcast or on our Instagram at You Need a Counselor Podcast. So I'm Chrissa Hunt.
And I'm Julie Johnson, and we need a counselor.
And so do you.
Bye.
Bye.